Arizona basketball fell this past weekend, but there's still an opportunity for this team to get a number one seed. As a matter of fact, most people think that they control their own destiny. What does Arizona need to do in the meantime to be able to get to that number one seed?
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. All right, now, Arizona basketball. Here's where we're at. Arizona right now is everybody wants to be a number one seed. I mean, I'm not really telling you anything that you don't already know. And you go around and you look at around the world of college basketball, and a big part of it is, you got 3 number one seeds already out there that are basically already been spoken for. You've got Kansas. You've got Uconn, you've got Purdue, and you've also got Houston. Those 3 teams are all very, very good. We'll talk about those teams very quickly. First, Uconn. I think if you were probably to pick a betting favorite to win it all, it would probably be Uconn. They are quite good. They got 5 guys that average in double figures. Obviously, getting Stefan Castle back was a huge thing for them because he kind of gives them a little bit of that athleticism on the perimeter that they didn't have before. And then up front, you've obviously got a plethora of big men. Donovan Clingan, big fan of him. You generally don't find 7-footers that can move like that. Plus, Danny Hurley is a really, really good basketball coach. You watch how his teams are constructed. You watch how he's able to work the officials. He does a really, really good job. I think it's hard to look at Danny Hurley and not be impressed by everything that he's done. As a matter of fact, I think you could make the case that he is the exact opposite of his brother, Bobby Hurley, being that everything he does seems to have a pretty good idea of where you're going. And again, on top of that, they're really, really tough. You've also got a good percentage of this core is back from winning the national championship last year. It's hard not to like what UConn's done. And on top of that, UConn's also very, very, they're just tough. They check off pretty much every box. You don't really look at any of UConn's games and say, all right, well, you don't really know what to expect from them. UConn is good, and they're probably the betting favorite to win it all, at least in my opinion. Okay, now, the next one, Houston. Houston defensively is probably the best team in the country. And there's a lot of similarities to UConn in a certain way, in that you've got a coach in Kelvin Sampson that absolutely just breeds toughness. Everybody that's watched him, whether that was during his time at Washington State, whether that was his time at Indiana, you just know that he's just a next level type coach. The dude and again, his teams are always tough. You never worry exactly, are they going to bring it that game? And he's got really, really good players, obviously. You've got a guard that I think is going to be a first-team All-American. You don't generally look at Shed's points and say that that he isn't, that he's not the most impactful player on the court, because he is. Then you've obviously got LJ Cryer on top of that. And again, they play teams tough, but they also play teams that can be in these games can be ugly. They can be in the 50s and 60s. And I think that's exactly the way that Sampson likes it. Arizona fans remember him obviously from his time at Oklahoma as well. But overall, just a really, really good team, and a team that, along with UConn, I think are the 2 teams that, as an Arizona fan, I want to see. Basically as late in the tournament as possible. That's the best way that I can. That's the best way that I can put it. Not really looking to play those teams before I absolutely have to. Then the other team, Purdue. Purdue is very good. I'm not gonna blow smoke. We're gonna make fun of the Big Ten here in a second, but Purdue is very good. There's no doubt about it. But the one thing about Purdue, though, that I think that we always need to bear in mind, though, is they, like Arizona, they got bounced in the first round last year, but again, you still have some real athletic limitations. Nobody looks at Purdue and says that that's an overwhelming athletic team, or that, with Zach Edey. Zach Edey's awesome, but I feel with Umar Ballo, leader of men, I believe that Arizona can do a pretty good job of counteracting a lot of what Purdue wants to do. Again, not all of it. I get all that, not all of it, but there's nobody on that team. And again, I get that they went bananas from 3-point range, but that also kind of proves my point. That there's nobody on that team really that scares me from just an ability to just dominate Arizona. Now, obviously, you got Lawyer, you got dudes like that are able to run off and shoot threes, and that's on Arizona to be able to defend that. But I also don't really worry necessarily about what Arizona is able to do when it comes to squads like that. I just really don't. I do think that I think Houston and Uconn, in my opinion, are a step up. Again, I think Purdue is still way too one-dimensional, and they're coming from the Big Ten. I'm sorry, man. Big Ten teams just don't do anything for me. Every year they get 35 teams in. Every year, all 35 teams lose in the first weekend, and then we have to pretend why we're stunned that all of these teams lost. That's just the way it is. It's not a conference that I find it terribly impressive, and it takes about 2 seconds to listen to anything that I do or follow anything on social media to know that I think that the Big Ten stinks. I see Purdue going out early again, maybe not the first weekend, but I don't see them getting past the Sweet 16. They don't really do a ton for me. And again, when your whole team is predicated on a big man, I think that that's a lot easier to defend. And Arizona didn't even play well against Purdue. And you were still down 4 or 5 with 6 minutes left, something like that, basically in Purdue. I would feel very comfortable with Arizona in a rematch maybe in the Final Four against Purdue. I would definitely pick Arizona to win that. But those are the 3 teams that with their resume, they are pretty much spoken for as being a 1 seed. And their resumes justify that. I just made fun of Purdue, but Purdue's resume absolutely justifies being a 1 seed. And there's really no other way that you can put it. UConn's resume is obviously awesome as well. They're a 1 seed, as is Houston. Houston's going to win the Big 12, and not only is Houston going to win the Big 12, I think they're going to be clearly the best team. They might drop a game or 2, but I don't really worry about that. They're very deserving. So those are the 3 teams that are going to be on that one line. On the one line. And right now, Arizona is that other team, but we just wanted to go first over a little bit how Arizona matches up with all of those teams, because again, it's not perfect necessarily, but the other thing though that I think Arizona fans need to know is who are those other teams that you are going against? How do you want to and who should you be rooting for? Who should you be rooting against? But first, FanDuel. Check it out. FanDuel.com/locked-on. All right. New customers, you put down $5, you can get $200 in free bets if that bet hits, that $5 bet. That simple, that easy. Again, check it out, FanDuel. As I always say, we're in the year with basketball. It's not nearly, we got basketball, my favorite sport, football. My second favorite sport isn't here. Bummer. But you know what? If you go with a different sport that's maybe not quite as enticing, guess what? It's a lot more enticing if you got a little bit of skin in the game. Check it out, FanDuel. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, now let's talk about the teams that Arizona is in contention with, and then we're going to talk about Arizona. But first, we need to know the competition. Who's exactly out there, and what does all this mean? Now, the first team that's going to be right there is Tennessee. Now, Tennessee's an interesting team for me. Rick Barnes is obviously a really good coach. But I've also watched Rick Barnes long enough to know that I do not fear Rick Barnes teams in the NCAA tournament. He's been doing this a long time. He's had some really, really good teams, and I get teams flame out early. Look at Arizona. We certainly got our fair share of that. But Rick Barnes has been to 1 Final Four. I don't really worry about his teams, but here's the deal. We're talking about seeding, who's where, who's doing what. With Rick Barnes, that Tennessee team, if they win out, I'll be honest with you, they deserve it because, again, they would have at that time they would have had to have gone through Alabama, Kentucky, Auburn, South Carolina. Those are some really, really, really good schools, some really good teams. And again, if they run that gauntlet, then you know what? I can't complain. I guess we'll be the 2 seed out west. But that's a gauntlet that I just don't see them going through. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to drop a couple of those games. And not only do I think they're going to drop a couple of those games, I also think that come SEC tournament time, and this is going to be kind of a familiar refrain with a couple of these other teams, they're probably going to drop a game as well. And that's why a lot of what Arizona does is a lot of Arizona's resume is going to be is what Arizona does with everything. And I think that's up to Arizona because these other teams, I believe, are going to lose or drop some games. Again, Tennessee is really good. You watch Rick Barnes' teams, though, offensively, they stink. Obviously, getting Ziegler back is big. But Tennessee, you could say they control their own destiny, but I will say that I would not want to be part of that destiny, mainly because of the schedule that you're going against. That is, like I said, that's a brutal schedule. That is an absolute gauntlet right there. So again, and the SEC is kind of underrated this year. Kentucky can't be a 1 seed, but Kentucky also is kind of the epitome of the SEC in that they are playing really good ball, and they've got a number of players across or on that squad. Obviously, they're playing the NBA, and they're playing pretty good, but they're not in contention. And as a matter of fact, I think they're going to beat Tennessee. Okay, now then you got Kansas. Kansas is fascinating because Kansas is obviously in the Big 12. Big 12, best conference in college basketball. We all know that. Arizona going to be there next year. They're very much looking forward to that. But first, Kansas just has a gauntlet of a schedule too. Kansas has the you're going to have, again, you're going to have your Houston, your Baylors, your et cetera. It's just going on and on down the list. Kansas, to me, is going to drop a game or two. And as good as this Kansas team is, it's not your typical vintage Bill Self team. The starting 5 is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, you got DeJuan Harris, you got Hunter Dickinson, you've got KJ Adams, you got McCullough. The starting 5 is about as good as there is in college basketball. The problem, though, is that they have very, very little depth. And that's kind of been something that's bit them in the butt a couple different times this year, is just not having that depth. There's a lot of times, in Bill Self's teams that he's able to bring in a couple guys off the bench that might not play in the NBA, but they'd be double players somewhere else. And he just doesn't really have that this year. And that's a little bit of an issue for him. Now, I will say that, with Bill Self, bet against him at your own peril, but I think that this year's team is a little bit too limited. And like I said, I think with their schedule, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for them. I don't see them traversing that unscathed. Again, kind of like Tennessee, though. If they do, then you got to just tip your cap to them because that would be some pretty impressive work. But again, I think they're a little bit too limited in that regard. I don't really see that one occurring. Now, then you got North Carolina. North Carolina to me is the best out of all these second tier teams is the best way I could put it. Teams, because you've got two real frontline players in RJ Davis and Armando Bacot. Bacot up front's obviously one of the best big men in college basketball. And not only is he one of the best big men in college basketball, he's a problem for essentially anyone. He's an issue. He's a load. We all know that. And then RJ Davis, very, very good. He's kind of North Carolina's Caleb Love. I'd rather have Caleb Love, but RJ Davis is really good. And then getting Harrison Ingram in there, who's turned out to be really, really good after he got out of Stanford, as he should have. But the problem I think with North Carolina is, and first of all, I think that they could absolutely be a 1 seed. I think their problem, though, that they're going to have is that they just don't have a ton of depth either. It's not a very deep team. But the ACC is also not like the Big 12 or even to the SEC, in that you're going to have 4 or 5 teams that you could drop games to. They don't really have that type of schedule. it's going to be fascinating to see exactly how they do. But if I were to pick one of these teams in that second four, that would probably be my leader in the clubhouse as far as being who could possibly push into that 1 seed. And then you got Marquette. Marquette's also got a really good resume. Marquette also, if they win out, they'll probably be a 1 seed as well. Marquette's got Uconn, though, coming up, and you've also got some other games as well that you could drop. They're interesting because, again, you've got a top flight point guard, obviously. You've got maybe the best point guard in college basketball. You got a really rangy, athletic big man up front. They're the team, like I said, if they win out and they're the 1 seed out west and Arizona's the 2 seed out west, I'm also more than okay with that. I like my chances against Marquette. Again, I think they're a good team. I think Shaka Smart's obviously done a really, really good job there, but they are a little bit limited. I think that Arizona's got a better players than them, but either way, Marquette is good, though. Marquette is really, really good. And, I think we'll find out a little bit more when they play Uconn, because Uconn obviously had a really tough game against Creighton, but I don't know that one's going to continue. Uconn kind of controls their own, but Marquette, you can make the case that they kind of control their own destiny as well. It'll be fascinating to see exactly how that plays out. But overall, this is a tough team. Like I said, Marquette's a tough team, but I'm more than okay with Arizona playing them. So those are essentially the teams. Now, you could say, well, there's teams that, could really cause some problems later on. You're right. But those are the teams that are essentially in contention. You got the 3 number 1 seeds that are already spoken for. And then you've got Arizona, which is the leader in the clubhouse to be the number 1 seed. The other number 1 seed ignores Seth Davis and Gary Parrish because the bracket prognosticators have Arizona as a 1. We're going to talk about why in a second. And then after that, you got those other 4 teams. You've got Kansas, you've got North Carolina, you've got Tennessee, and you've got Marquette. Those are the teams. So root against those teams as you do see fit. Now, we're going to talk about Arizona then, the elephant in the room, coming up next. But first, game time. All right, now, let's say that you don't maybe have tickets to some of these games, and you're like, man, I'd really like to get out to some of these games. Well, guess what? Game time is here for you. Download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Very nice deal there. $20 off. And again, and this isn't just for basketball. You can get tickets for, you can get concerts. You can get all kinds of different things. In fact, our good friend William Brad Alice has utilized Gametime. So again, check it out. Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about Arizona's basketball schedule. Arizona now, like I said, I've been saying this for a long time. I believe Arizona is the controller of their own fate. I don't really care, especially with the teams that they've got coming up. To me, it's far more about what Arizona does than what any team that playing Arizona does. And that's why, because again, especially in the Pac-12, Arizona's got size. Arizona's got bigs, obviously bigs. Arizona's got wings. Arizona's got guards. Arizona's just got a lot of different dudes that, that can make plays. And you've got a player in Caleb Love who can take over a game and really wants the ball at the end of games. Arizona did not have somebody like that last year. And again, Love's far from perfect, but I'm glad that he's on Arizona's squad. That's for sure. But look at the rest of the schedule that you got coming up. Obviously, the Washington State loss was a setback, but Washington State's good. Arizona's back in number 1. Thanks, ASU, for being useful pawns. But Arizona's also the team that, they should. Let's be honest here. You should beat ASU up in Tempe on Wednesday. You just should. You should also be able to beat. Oregon at home. Oregon's not that good. And you should be able to beat the LA schools. Now, granted, it's on the road, but USC stinks. They just got a nice win against UCLA. I get it, but they're not good. And Mick Cronin's team stinks as well. That's not a good UCLA team. These are teams that Arizona should absolutely beat. And so you went out. I believe that you're going to be a 1 seed for a variety of the reasons that we just put forth. But also, I do believe that I do believe that Arizona has essentially one loss to play with, but that one loss goes through the regular season and into the Pac-12 tournament. Arizona, first and foremost, you want to win out. You need to win the conference regular season, and you want to win it outright. This isn't a good conference. We all know that. And so one thing that doesn't look great is if Arizona can't win the conference outright. Arizona needs to win the conference outright. That to me is a big thing. That is a priority over winning the Pac-12. If Arizona does that, then I think you're playing with house money, because I think Arizona would be the number 1 seed out west. Now, let's say that they're not the 1 seed out west. Still think you're looking at a 2 seed at the very worst out west. And I'm fine with that one as well, because again, if you're a 2 seed out west, that's certainly not the worst situation to be in, because you're going to be playing the weakest of the number 1 seeds. That's fine. It's kind of the same thing. Like if you're going to be the number 1 seed out west, you're going to play the weakest of the number 1 seeds, or if you're a 1 seed out west, you're going to play the best of the 2, or if you're a 1, you're going to play the weakest of the 1. It's just kind of that. It just kind of is what it is. So you got that. And then with going forward, going forward, you've also got nobody that you should really lose to. But one thing that is interesting about Arizona is, yes, you're in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 stinks. We get all that, obviously. But there's also some fairly good – Arizona's got some pretty good, darn good wins on their resume at this point. Beating Duke in Cameron is big. I mean, again, it just is. Beating Duke in Cameron is big. Also, beating the Alabama game, which I didn't think that Alabama at the time was going to be very good. That's turning out to be a very, very nice win for Arizona, beating Alabama. And then you got some other quad 1 wins that obviously against maybe not great teams, but you beat Colorado at Colorado, you beat Utah at Utah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Arizona's kind of taking care of business, but you got to win out, though, in my opinion, the regular season, and they should be able to win out. Otherwise, you got to win the conference championship. Anything can kind of happen in those kind of 1-game spots. But listen, I'm at the point too. If you can't beat Oregon at home, or you can't beat ASU on the road, or beat the LA schools, then you really don't deserve to. You really don't deserve that. I expect Arizona to do that, though. And the big thing with Arizona a lot of times, I think, is motivation. And there's no reason that Arizona shouldn't be motivated. Not only is there really no reason that Arizona shouldn't be motivated, I think we're also kind of at the stage too where, listen, we know how good this team could be. And not only do we know how good this team could be, we're also kind of at the point too where Arizona's, they're going to be judged in March. It'd be awesome to get a number 1 seed, obviously. But nobody's going to care if Arizona's a 3 seed, but they make the Final Four. What they are going to care about is if Arizona's a 1 seed and they get bounced in the round of 32. That can't happen. Again, this team is going to be judged come March, and they should be judged come March, because this team is built to be able to succeed come March. It's just going to be up to the squad to be able to make that one happen. And, we'll be along for the ride. But as always, very much appreciate all of you making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, we will be back with you tomorrow. And again, I promise you we're going to get to some football, but we are in the middle of basketball season, obviously, and that is a very good thing. But you all have a very, very safe rest of your Tuesday, and we will talk with you tomorrow.